All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and start the video. I hope this is working. Feel free if you have any questions, I'll go ahead and get started. So, this is just going to be a quick tutorial on. I'm just going to explain the way that I make disciples. So, I have a very specific process that I like to use. It's a disciple making plan. When I'm training somebody to follow Jesus, and I do this all the time. I mean, I am passionate about discipleship, personal discipleship, because when I first came to the Lord, I had some godly men that invested in me. They taught me how to pray. They taught me how to share my faith. They taught me how to obey God and live in purity. I mean, they just taught me the fundamentals of walking with Jesus, how to read my Bible every day. That was a huge one. And those like fundamental things that they taught me early in my walk with the Lord actually laid a foundation that has still serves me today. I'm so thankful for it. And I've also seen the impact of over the years of just investing in other people and teaching them these fundamental things about how to walk with God, how to grow in your relationship with God and be fruitful. And so I've watched the effect that they've had on other people and been a blessing to them. So I'm going to share some stuff with you. I've been doing disciple making probably for, nearly 30 years. I've been making disciples in some way, like actively involved in making disciples. And for most of that time. And I would say, especially since 2014, the last 7 years, I have been devoted to studying the science, if you will, of disciple making and just learning how to, how can I be more effective at helping people get established in the Lord and grow in their walk with Jesus and bear fruit. And so here's some of the things that I do. So basically, my discipleship plan, there's basically three components to it. And I call it the 12 stories, 5 habits, and 4 milestones. And so when I lead somebody to the Lord, I baptize them, and I'm going to disciple them now. Or a believer comes to me, and they're a new believer, and they say, "Hey, would you meet with me and help me grow in my walk with Jesus and just learn some things?" This is what I do with every single person that I disciple. Is I teach them 12 stories. I train them to practice 5 habits as a way of life. And then in the process of doing that, there are 4 milestones that I encourage them to aim at and that they're going to hit eventually if they just keep going in the things that I train them. And when they do, we're going to celebrate that together. And so here's what they are. So the 12 stories, what that is I want the people I'm discipling to know the basic storyline of the Bible. The whole Bible tells one story from Genesis to Revelation. It's one unfolding story. Although it's 66 books, the whole Bible, it tells one story that from Genesis to Revelation. And I want right away, I want like people I'm discipling, I want them to learn that fundamental storyline of the Bible. And what I've done is I've identified 12 chapters. We start in Genesis 1 and we end at the end of the book of Revelation. 12 key chapters that kind of trace the plot line of the biblical story from Genesis to Revelation. And each time we meet together, we read another one of those stories. And then we'll do a discovery Bible study question. So I'll ask them questions such as, what we read the story, and I'll say, what's your favorite, what's the stuff that stands out to you in this story? And then I'll ask them, this is my favorite question. I'll ask them, what did you learn about God? Like what he's like, or about the nature of God? What did you learn about what God's like? Or about his nature from that story? If all you knew about God was what you just read in that chapter that we read together, what does that tell you about who God is and what he's like? And then I let them share. And then the third question I'll ask them is, what do we learn about people from this story? And I let them just pull out things that they learned about the human nature and about people from that story. And then I like to also ask the question, what's one thing that you learned in this story that can help you in your daily walk with Jesus? And I let them share that. And I always make sure that as we're going through that, when we're meeting together, I try to meet with them at least ideally once a week is what I like to do, where we set a regular time, a scheduled time where we're going to meet each week. And we just start, each time we meet together, we read another one of these 12 stories. And then I ask them those discovery Bible study questions. And then I like to end with that question, like, what's something you learned in this story that's going to really help you as you seek to live for Jesus tomorrow? And I let them share. And then I always end with worship, because the goal of Bible study is worship. I'm training them even as we read the scriptures together, especially the question where I'm like, what did we just learn about God, about who he is and what God is like from that story? And then every time you read something in the Bible, I always teach them this. You're like something in that story is going to reveal some aspect of God's beauty, of his nature to you. That's beautiful. And you never want to take that for granted. Every time you're reading the Bible and you see something glorious about God in the way he is, you want to stop and actually thank him for that aspect of his nature and then worship him in response. So let me give you an example. So we may be meeting together, we may read Genesis 1, and we see that God is the source of all life. So then what we do is when we finish discussing this story, we take turns worshiping God. And I'll say, "Hey, I'll go first and then you can go after me." And then I'll say something like, "God, I just thank you that you are the source of all life. I see that in Genesis 1. And I worship you as the creator of all things. And I thank you for giving me breath. Thank you, God, for the stars. Thank you for the moon. I love the skies. I love the trees and the vegetation and the animals. Thank you that you made this planet. It's beautiful. I enjoy it." And I just begin thanking God and worshiping him for what I just saw of him in that scripture. And then when I'm finished, I have them do the same thing with me out loud. I'll just tell them, "Hey, we're going to worship God now. Do you want to go first or me?" And I let them choose. But they know we're going to do this out loud. And so we do that together. So that's like the 12 stories. And we just actually, each time we meet together, we just work through another one of those stories and until we finish the biblical storyline. And then they have a kind of at least a fundamental grasp of the main points of the plot line of the biblical story. So yeah, that's what I do for the 12 stories. And that's a really essential part of what I'm teaching them. The second thing I train them to do when we're meeting together once a week is I train them to practice the 5 habits of a fruitful life. And I'll just tell you what those are. They are Bible reading, regular Bible reading, prayer, a lifestyle of obeying God's commands. Godly fellowship is the 4th habit. And then the 5th habit is disciple making. I train them to make disciples. And so I'm very specific about each one of these 5 things. And I just tell them right away. They know what I'm doing. Like, I actually have a piece of paper. I can show it to you. Just like this. Or I have like a copy of this on my phone that's always with me. And I will just tell them, like, "Hey, this is what I'm going to do with you." And I show them the 5 habits of a fruitful life. And I'm like, I want you, we're going to be building these habits into your life. And you're going to do these for the rest of your life, because these 5 habits, like your prayer life, is essential to your spiritual health. Like, not just today, but for the rest of your regularly reading the Bible and gazing upon the beauty of God and washing your mind and your heart and recalibrating your heart and your mind in the scriptures is so important to your spiritual health every day for the rest of your life. And so what I do, right, is the first time we meet is I said, "Let's get you a Bible reading plan." And I will ask them 3 questions to help them get a Bible plan. And I'll have them get out their phone and type out these 3 questions on the notepad or something on their phone, or write it down on a piece of paper. And I'll actually tell them to do that, write this down, because I want them to remember it and to go home and practice it so they can look it up again and remember what they wrote, their plan was. And I ask them 3 questions to get a Bible reading plan. First, I say, "Hey, when are you going to read the Bible each day?" And I let them decide. I don't care when they read it. It's just, everybody's schedule's different. Doesn't matter to me, just as long as they're doing it. So they may say, "I'm going to do it in the morning," or "I'm going to do it when I get home from school," or "I'm going to do it in the evening before I go to sleep." And I'm like, "That's great. Whatever it is, I don't care." But I have them write it down. And then once they know when they're going to read the Bible each day, I ask them the second question. I say, "Listen, I said, how much of the Bible are you going to read each day?" And there's 2 ways that they can do this. And I just give them the option. I say, you can choose, like, set a goal, like, I'm going to read a certain amount of time every day, like 15 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day or an hour a day, whatever they decide. Or you can set a quantity goal and where they say, I'm going to read a certain amount of chapters per day. I'm going to read, 2 chapters a day or 4 chapters a day or whatever it is. I let them choose, but write down something specific. What is your goal for how much of the Bible you're going to read each day? And what I encourage them to do is I tell them this, right from the beginning, I said, listen, it's like I'm going to have you start in the book of Genesis right at the beginning of the Bible and just read the whole thing straight through like you would any other book, because that's the best way to read the Bible and understand the storyline of what's happening. And so I didn't tell them this. I was like, it looks like a big book. It looks intimidating, but these chapters are short. If you read just a little over 3 chapters a day, you'll read through the entire Bible in a year. And so I'm like, this is doable. So a lot of times they'll be like, I'm going to read 3 chapters a day or 4 chapters a day or whatever it is. But whatever they decide, that's good. So how much of the Bible are you going to read each day? And then the third question I asked them is, for their crafting their own Bible reading plan, is what are you going to read in the Bible each day? And it's not the best practice to just play Russian roulette every day. And so many people do this, where it's like, okay, I got to read my Bible today. And they get out the Bible. What should I read? I'll try Psalms. That sounds interesting. Or next day they'll be like, I don't know, maybe how about Book of Revelation, and I don't know, I don't understand that. Let's read about Jesus. I'll go to John. And they'll be like, well, I don't know, maybe Genesis. And a lot of people, they just skip around in the Bible. But here's the deal. If you, any other book, if you read it like that, you would miss so many key important parts of that book. And it's like, start at the beginning and just read it straight through to the end. And when you finish, go back to the beginning and read it straight through again, and just keep repeating that for the rest of your life over and over and over. And over those 10-year cycles of life, you'll probably read through the whole Bible at least 5 times. Just by diligently, methodically reading through the scriptures. Don't, plow through the hard parts. If you get to a part that's like, oh, this is a hard part to read, just plow through it. Don't skip it. Like, all of it is important. And when you kind of read the whole thing, 6-7 years from now, even those parts that you're plowing through that seem really hard to understand today, they'll make sense to you 6-7 years down the road, because you'll be way more familiar with the whole biblical storyline. And so it won't be like these new foreign ideas to you. You'll get it more and more. So when I have them write the question, what are you going to read in the Bible each day? I want them to have a plan where they know when they show up to read the Bible today, they know exactly where they're going to read. They're going to start where they left, put their bookmark yesterday where they left off, and they're going to pick up and keep on going. So I always encourage them, start in Genesis and just read till you finish the whole Bible. And read the whole thing. It's just a big thing that I emphasize. Now, I don't know if there's anybody. I just want to check here. It says I have no viewers. I hope I'm actually streaming right now. I don't know if I am. I hope I'm actually streaming. But I'll just keep going in faith and hope that it's working. So if you have any questions, again, like about discipleship that you'd like me to answer, just type them out in the comments. I'm hoping I'll be able to see them when they show up here, and then I'll try my best to answer them for you. So again, 3 components of my disciple making plan is the 12 stories. I train them in the 12 stories, which I've already talked about. I train them the 5 habits. So we talked about the Bible reading one. And then we aim at 4 milestones. So the second habit of a fruitful life is a prayer plan. I help them get a prayer plan. And for a prayer plan, I make it really, really simple to start with. And I just ask the same 3 questions for a Bible reading plan. I'll ask them, hey, write this down. I always have them write it down. I want them to have a written down plan. So I ask them, when are you going to pray each day? And of course, the goal is to pray, to stay in communion and fellowship with God all day long throughout the day. But I think it's really important to have a time of day that you set aside time to focus on God and to pray and read the Word. So I asked them, when is that going to be? When are you going to pray each day? And then I let them write that down. A lot of times they do it at the same time they do their Bible reading. The second question I ask them is this, as I say, how long are you going to pray each day? So I have them set a time goal. Are you going to pray 15 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, whatever it is? I don't care. 5 minutes a day. I'm not even worried about that. I mean, 5 minutes isn't that much, right? But I just want them to get started and get in the habit of it. If it's 2 minutes a day, I celebrate that. I'm like, awesome, 2 minutes a day. But the thing is once we get this Bible reading plan, it becomes really easy for them to fill out 2 minutes or fill up 5 minutes actually. And they're like, man, I need more time. And I want that to happen. So I just want to get them going in the habit. So I say, how long are you going to pray each day? And they write it down. And then the third question of the Bible reading plan, the prayer plan is, what are you going to pray about each day? Because that's one of the hardest things. Sometimes you show up, it's like, okay, I'm going to pray. But then you got, it's like, oh, what am I going to pray about? And you can't think of anything. And, I've been doing this like almost 30 years, and that still happens to me sometimes where I show up and I just feel out of it. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I need a prayer plan to help jumpstart me into a spirit of prayer. And so I help them come up with a prayer plan of what they're going to pray about. And I have them do this. I have them write it down. I say, okay, there's 2 parts of your prayer time. The first is worship. And I may get a piece of paper and just have them draw a line down the middle. On the left column, I say, write worship at the top. And then I just say, okay, underneath worship, I want you to just brainstorm and think of 10 things that you really like about God or that you're just thankful to God for. And I just give them a few minutes to write those 10 things down. And they write it down. God, I love that you forgave my sins. God, I love that you're merciful. God, I love that you're pure and you always tell the truth. God, I'm so thankful that you've given me health. I'm thankful for my wife, And I just let them create a list of at least 10 things. I have them write those things down. What are you thankful for? What are some specific things that you like about God himself? And then when you get to the worship time, just get your list out. And if you can't think of anything, just say, oh yeah. And then actually talk to God and say it out loud to him. God, thank you that you've forgiven my sins. I love that about you, that you're merciful. Thank you so much. God, thank you for my wife. She's a gift from the Lord. Thank you. And it just helps get them in a flow of worship and prayer. And so that's what I do for that part. And I said the second part of half of your prayer time is going to be, you're going to be petitioning God and you're going to be asking God to do things. And I said this is important because when you ask God to do things in faith, God will release his power and do those things because you asked when it's according to his plan. And there's things that God wants to do that won't happen if you don't ask him to do it. So I in the second column, just write prayer at the top. And I want you to write down, I'm like, what are 5 things that you want God to help you with or that you want God to help other people with? And what are you passionate about? What do you want God to release his power to do, And they may write down, hey, I want my mom to come to know Jesus and get saved. I want my spouse to get saved. I want to be healed. I want God to help me grow in wisdom. I want God to help me at school. I'm struggling with this class. Or I want God to help me in on my football team, that I'll do good and I'll have a good season and not be injured. I'm like, whatever it is. And I always encourage in this direction, who do you want to see get saved? Is there people in the world, a nation in the world that needs to know Jesus? Put them on your prayer list. If you pray for them, God will release his power and answer those prayers. So put them on there. And I just have them write a list of 5 to 10 different things, specific things that they're going to ask God to release his power and do for them. And once they have that list, they've got a good prayer list to start with, honestly. And they can easily fill 5 to 10 minutes a day just if they did nothing else but just go through their list and give thanks to God and worship him for the things they like about him and ask him to intervene and help for the situations and people that they wrote in their prayer column. So that's what I do to help people jumpstart them into growing their prayer life. So that's the second habit of a fruitful life. Again, I just want to reiterate, I'm going to check again. Okay, if there's anyone just got a comment on here or a question you'd like me to answer about discipleship, just feel free to write it in the comments, and hopefully I will see it. Like I said, I'm doing this. I've not done Facebook Live this way before. I hope I'm doing it right. I hope this is even working, and I'm not wasting my time. But we'll find out when it's all done. Okay. The third habit of a fruitful life is a lifestyle of obedience. And I talk about that from the beginning. Like when I share the gospel, a lot of times if I'm unsure if somebody's really saved, In the very first discipleship meeting, I clearly explained the gospel to them, like clearly. And I tell them, Acts 2:38 and 2:39, I'm like, this is what you need to do to be saved. You need to repent of your sin. Like, you can't just say, I'm a Christian, and go on living in disobedience to God when you know something's wrong and you just say, forget it, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm like, that's not okay. Like, you can't be a believer and just flippantly disobey God. Like, to become a disciple of Jesus, you have to repent. You have to turn away from a sinful lifestyle, and you turn to God in faith. And you have to follow Jesus and obey his commandments. So I make that clear from the beginning, and they just kind of know that. Like, if I'm talking to somebody and sharing the gospel with them and they're not on board with committing to obey Jesus, now they may not do it very well yet. I mean, they're like, I want to obey God, but they're struggling, and like, they're like, 5 times out of 10 when they get tempted, they fail. But they're sincere and they're like, no, I really want to obey. I'm like, that's cool. I'll work with that, right? But if they're just like stubborn and they're just like in their mind, they're like, no, I know this is wrong, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to obey God. Like, I'm just like, you know what, then? Like, you're not really a disciple of Jesus. I'm straight with them. I tell them, you're not a disciple of Jesus. And I tell them lovingly, but I'm not going to invest in them and spend hours and hours a month, meeting with this person, investing in them, if they're not going to put into practice the things that they're learning. And so we just make that clear. A lifestyle of obedience is just fundamental. It's foundational for even being a follower, a disciple of Jesus. And so they know that. And so it's just kind of automatic as we go through and we meet every week. We just talk about, hey, what's God speaking to you about that you need to obey? And how are you doing? And because they'll bring up in the course of conversation, like, I need to grow in this area, or I'm struggling with this temptation to overcome, and God's speaking to me about this. And it's different for different people, but I kind of know what that is. And so I'll ask, I was like, hey, how are you doing with not looking at pornography? How are you doing with sexual purity? How are you doing with not drinking or not smoking, or how are you doing with being truthful and honoring your parents? Whatever it is with their thing that God's dealing with them about, I know what that is. And so I'll ask them regularly how they're doing on that and help them if I need to give them accountability for that. One of the things, and I'll just throw this in here, one of the things I offer people when I'm discipling them is I tell them, you know what, like, you don't have to fight spiritual battles all by yourself. It's like God is with you all the time. And most of the time, temptation will come. You'll be able to just, you and the Lord, resist it, put it out of your mind, and go on, and it just kind of goes away and you're fine, right? But there'll be times where even though you're trying to resist the temptation, it just keeps hanging around and wearing you down. And you're just like, I'm trying to resist. I am resisting, but I feel like I'm about to cave and give into this temptation. And I always tell them, before you do that, I was like, call me or send me a text message any time of the day. And what I'll do, and you don't even have to tell me what it is if you don't want to. You could just say, pray for me. And I'll know exactly what you're talking about. I'll know you're struggling with temptation right now and you're about to give in. And here's my commitment to you. I will immediately pray for you when I read your text message. Like, seriously, I will pray for you and God is going to help you. And then what I'll do is the next morning, I'm going to send you a text message, or I'm going to call you and ask how you did last night. And what that does is it helps them in those moments where they're being excessively tempted, and it helps them, that extra little accountability gives them the grace they need to resist it, because they know, man, Jeff's going to text me in the morning and ask how I did, and I'm not going to lie, and I want to be able to say I did good. And a lot of times that just breaks the power of whatever they're facing right then. And I've had guys tell me before, like, thank you so much, that helped me get through. So anyway, that's kind of obedience. I train them in the habit of obedience. That's the third habit of a fruitful life. Fourth habit of a fruitful life is regular godly fellowship. And that's where I'm training them to get in the habit of regularly meeting with other believers who are following Jesus, not just to hang out and play video games or watch a football game or whatever, watch a movie together. I mean, that's fine. Do that stuff. I love it, right? But not just to do that. You need to be regularly meeting with other believers and praying together, encouraging one another, ministering to other people and sharing the gospel together, studying the word together. I mean, doing the things that believers do in the Bible. You need to be doing that regularly. And so they're already doing that by meeting with me each week. But then also, as they lead other people to the Lord, or we have other people kind of join our little discipleship group, is I really encourage them to be intentional about maintaining that regular godly fellowship in their life. It's essential to have long-term fruitfulness in their walk with the Lord. And the final habit, the fifth habit of a fruitful life that I train them in, is making the habit of making disciples. So and there's two, I've done other videos on my YouTube channel, and I just encourage you to check out the 5-State Revival YouTube channel, where I have whole videos where I talk about the disciple making process. I talk about, how to go find a person of peace and do discovery Bible studies and baptize them and etc. So I won't go into all that here, but I'll just say this. When I'm discipling somebody, I do explain that process to them, and I train them in it. And here's how I train them. I take like 5 minutes. I can do it in 5 minutes and explain the simple process of, here's how to go find a person of peace. And when you find somebody who wants to know Jesus, meet with them to do a discovery Bible study with them. And then when they're ready to follow Jesus, here's how to baptize them, and then start teaching them to obey Jesus' commands like I'm doing with you, right? So I can give them the overview of how to do that in 5 minutes. And then what I do is, here's the most important part of it, is I take them out to do it with me. That's the best thing. I take them with me, and we go out and we go to some apartment complex, and I'll tell them, I said, listen, all I want you to do this time is just watch me. I'm going to do the exact process I just taught you how to do, and I just explained how to do it. Now I want you to watch me. I'm going to show you what it looks like and how to do it and what it looks like in real life. And you don't have to say or do anything this time. Just watch and pay attention to what I'm doing. I'm doing the exact thing I just told you how to do. And then I go out and I model it for them. And then when I share the gospel, I do the whole thing. I pray for people until I find a person of peace. And then when I do, I ask that person to meet for a discovery Bible study, and I set a time, we come back and we meet up with them. And I actually have them do the process with me. And then what happens, it's like, okay, now you're doing that. Now I want you to do it. So this time you pray for the person, and I'll be here. And if you get stuck, I'll be here to back you up. And I just train them how to go share their faith, make disciples. And I do this from the very beginning in this way too. I always encourage them. I'm like, hey, who do you know? Who do you know that would be excited to learn about Jesus, what you just learned about Jesus? Go tell them about it. Go tell them what just happened to you. Just go tell them that you just gave your life to God and what he just did in your life. Go tell them the story that you just learned in Genesis 1 or Genesis 3 or whatever it was. And invite them if they want to meet with you and read the Bible together. And I just tell them that from the beginning. And then eventually we get to the point as well where I do a more detailed training, and I start taking them with me into the harvest and train them how to make disciples. And I want to just say one more thing about training a disciple to be a disciple maker, okay? I train them on two fronts. First, I train them just how to make disciples as a way of life wherever they are. But the second thing, and I really want to encourage you to do this, is making the Great Commission. Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations. That's every people group on the earth. So I teach them right away. I was like, that's not just making disciples where you're at. You need to be thinking about unreached people groups in the earth who have no access to the gospel whatsoever. And so what I do is I actually will sit down with them, and I'll show them Joshua Project, the website Joshua Project. And I'll say, this is a list of all the unreached people groups in the world. Pick one of them and adopt one of them as your own and build them into your daily prayer plan. And I'll even do this. I'll just say, hey, let's set a prayer alarm on our cell phones. You pick the unreached people group, and then at 10:02 a.m., we'll both set a prayer alarm on our cell phones to pray for that people group. So they may pick, this certain people group in India. I'll say, awesome. And then we both set a prayer alarm for 10:02 a.m., and our alarm goes off, and then we pray. And I actually give them 3 or 4 scriptures that they can just pray over unreached people groups that are excellent. And I might as well just give those to you right now. And so the first one is I'm not going to remember the reference. The first one is from Matthew 9, and I pray for God to raise laborers to preach the gospel and make disciples among that people group. That's the first thing we pray for. And the second thing, so I'm actually teaching them how to pray for unreached people groups, and I'm training them in it because they're doing it every day where they're setting a prayer alarm. And I do the same thing when my prayer alarm goes off. So a lot of times after I get done, I'll send them a text message, or maybe I'll send them a voice memo of me praying for that unreached people group. And again, I'm training them. The goal is initially, I'm training them to make disciples locally wherever they're at, but also to be engaging the Lord in prayer, to reach unreached people groups and other places in the world. And so that's part of making disciples. So if you have any questions about that, you're welcome to just put them in the comments, and I'd be happy to answer them. Again, I hope this is really working. We'll see. But I'm just going to do one more thing just to kind of wrap up this training video. So remember, my discipleship plan, I'm going into lots of detail here because you should be able to watch this video and disciple anybody, okay? I train them in, there's 3 components to the disciple making plan. First, there is the 12 stories, the storyline of the Bible, okay? Second, I train them to practice the 5 habits of a fruitful life. And third, I encourage them to aim at 4 strategic milestones, okay? And these are 4 milestones. They're more like long-term goals that helps them to but if they just persevere in practicing those 5 habits, they're going to hit every single one of these 4 milestones eventually. And I encourage them to aim at that and then we're going to celebrate it whenever they hit each one of those milestones. So here's what those 4 key milestones are. First, read the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Okay? Like, I celebrate that with them, and I say, hey, just keep on your Bible reading plan, and when you get finished with the whole Bible and you've officially read the entire Bible for yourself, okay, we are going to celebrate it together. That is an awesome milestone that I encourage them to aim at. The second milestone is to go on a missions trip. Go somewhere other than the local area where you live. Preferably go to another country, okay? Go to anywhere, I don't care. Go to another nation, get on a missions trip, and go and get a feel for what Jesus is doing in the nations of the earth. You know, get outside your little bubble of the area, the country, the city where you live, and go to another place, another people, and share the gospel there. You know, there's tons of different ways and missions trips that you can get involved in, and I'll help them find that if they need to. And I go on missions trips, and you know, our church sometimes will have missions trips. So I always encourage them, go on a missions trip, because I want them to have a Great Commission lifestyle where they're making disciples locally, but also engaging the unreached people groups with the gospel. And then, so going on a missions trip, when they go on a missions trip, we celebrate it. It's a great thing. The third milestone that I encourage them to aim at is when they lead somebody else to Jesus and baptize that person. That's a milestone. We're going to celebrate it. Okay. So they're already sharing the gospel. When they share the gospel with someone and they lead that person to Jesus, and then they're going to baptize them, because that's the beginning of discipling them, making a disciple. We're going to celebrate it because they are a bona fide, fruitful disciple maker at that point. And that is huge. And I always tell them, I was like, do you know how many Christians in America have never even shared their faith with somebody, let alone led another person to Jesus? And I'm like, you're not going to be that way. You're going to be a biblical disciple, and a biblical disciple is a disciple maker. And so we celebrate it. When they lead someone to Jesus the first time and they baptize them, we're going to celebrate it. And I always tell them, I said, listen, you're already sharing the gospel. You just work the process and be diligent and steady at it. It's just any moment now. In just a matter of time until you find a person of peace and get to lead them to the Lord. So we celebrate that when it happens. And then the fourth milestone is this: when they disciple somebody else. So when they train somebody else to understand the 12 chapter storyline, when they train another believer to practice the 5 habits, when they train another believer to accomplish the 4 milestones, we celebrate that, because when they've gotten to the point where they have trained somebody else they've effectively made a mature disciple is what they've done. When they've done that, they have matured to the point where they are an effective, mature, and fruitful disciple maker. And we celebrate that. That is a huge milestone of growth in their ministry effectiveness and their fruitfulness and their walk with the Lord. So we celebrate that. And so that's the disciple making plan. That's what I do. And anyway, I hope that was clear. I hope it was even recorded, to be honest with you. But I hope it was clear on the video. I'll just end with this. The other day, I was meeting with a guy. I've been discipling him for about 3 months. And I got out this sheet of paper explains the disciple making plan that I just explained to you. And I said, hey, I want to encourage you. I said, you've been doing this thing. We've been meeting for about 3 months, right? Where you've been going hard after following Jesus. And he's like, yep. I'm like, okay. So here, and I show them, this is the disciple making plan that I'm doing with you. And I'm like, look at this already. You're only 3 months into it. And listen, we're already, about a third of the way through the biblical storyline. Because him and I, we're going through it extra slow. I'm doing more than 12 chapters with him just for fun because we're not in a rush and we got the time to do it. So we're doing the longer version, the more fun version. I'm like, dude, you're already this far into the biblical storyline. You've already learned this much in just 3 months. And I said, not only that, but you're practicing already. You're only 3 months into your walk with the Lord and you're practicing all 5 of the habits of a fruitful life. Already you're doing it. You have a prayer life. You were just telling me about how you were feeling God's presence this week and how God spoke to you and you were praying and asked God's help and then he gave you a word and he responded. He was answering your prayers. I'm like, man, you've got a prayer life, dude. You're doing it. I'm like, you're already got a Bible reading plan. You're doing it. I'm like, you're obeying God. You're living for Jesus. You are doing godly fellowship already. You're doing it really well, not only with me, but with some others as well. And then I told him, I said, dude, you're already making disciples. We've gone out together several times and sharing our faith. And even when I'm not with you and you're at school or something else, you're sharing your faith. I'm like, you're doing it. You are practicing all 5 habits of a fruitful life. I'm like, you're about to go on a missions trip in a month and you'll cross that milestone off. You're already on your way to reading through the entire Bible. It's just a matter of time. You're sharing your faith. Any moment now you're going to lead somebody to Jesus. I'm like, dude, you're only 3 months in and look how far you've come already. And he was so encouraged. I was encouraged, but he was like, wow, I'm really growing. God is changing my life. And he was excited. And so I find it really helpful. The way I used to disciple people, I used to do this and it would always end up being frustrating and not as helpful. Is we'd meet together like weekly or something, but I didn't really have a focused plan like I just told you about, where I was training them in specific things that they need to know to grow in God. So we would just meet together and it would just kind of like have a conversation. I'd be like, well, how are you doing? What's God doing in your life? And some weeks it would be good. Some weeks it wouldn't be that good. They'd be like, oh, God's doing this. Or maybe be like, oh, nothing. I don't know. Nothing really. I don't know. I'm like, well, what's God saying to you? I don't know. How do you feel like you're growing in the Lord? I don't know. Or sometimes they would, but a lot of times it was just like, okay. Or they'd just be like every single week they got the same problem. Like, oh, I'm just struggling in this. And they just want like a counseling session. And I would get frustrated. They would get frustrated. It wouldn't be very helpful because the whole focus of our meeting, they were the center of focus instead of Jesus. And so I want right away with this 12 stories, 5 habits, 4 milestones structure, Jesus is the focus. And I'm training them in the way of life that they're going to daily interact with Jesus, become like Jesus, and make Jesus known to other people. And there's like a ton of growth that happens in their life when there's focused intentionality. So I'm really pleased with the fruit that I'm seeing. I'll probably keep tweaking this plan, because I'm going to be a lifelong student of how to be more effective at making disciples. But at this point, this is what I'm doing, and I'm encouraged by the fruit that I'm seeing. So I just wanted to make a video where I could explain it in a lot of detail so that you can go out and put it into practice or adapt it and, tweak it, make it your own if you want to do that. But I encourage you, you can be fruitful at making disciples. Encourage you to just take it and run with it. And yeah, thanks for watching.